Okay, our next presentation is from David Mitchinson. He's from a company called Appear, whom I first met a few weeks ago at the JT&M Tested event in Wuppertal. Really interesting new entrant, I think, into the 2110 market, at least new to me. So Dave is going to be here to talk about some practical considerations that are derived from real customer experiences. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to see how things actually work in the real world. So very much looking forward to your presentation, David. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Wes, and good afternoon, everybody. All right, so Appear. One of our core businesses is actually providing contribution and distribution links. So we're actually talking about long-distance backhaul of content. And a lot of our customers are big telcos as well as broadcasters. So we do a lot of this stuff. And what I'd like to describe is some of the experiences that we've had working in this environment. And what I'm showing on this slide is really what I'm talking about. You have a major event, a sporting event, for example. You need to get the content back either to another studio or the cloud. How do you actually do it? What we've actually seen is a definite migration path over the last couple of years within the industry. Because all of our customers started out, once they'd migrated to IP, using AVC and HEVC codecs with MPEG-TS encapsulation over these networks. And it works great. It's reliable, it's consistent. If you're supporting HD services and don't need any of the newer standardization functionality, then you can actually get pretty low latency, reasonable high bandwidth efficiency. The compromise works well for distribution and contribution. But we're entering a new era now where expectations are increasing. 100 milliseconds is no longer good enough for many customers. Uncompressed quality is the goal with line level latency. We're talking 15, 20 milliseconds for the whole end-to-end delivery chain. With, of course, all of the bells and whistles supporting 4K content, supporting HDR. And that is why a lot of the industry is now looking at newer standards with light compression such as JPEG XS. And a lot of our business actually is now centered upon providing JPEG XS solutions. So what are the options? With the JPEG XS codec delivering almost uncompressed VQ performance at reasonable compression gains of, let's say, 10 to 1. You have traditionally the encapsulation option of maintaining your ST2110 workflow. So if you're starting within a 2110 environment, you can maintain that across the whole of the distribution chain and end up with 2110 again back in your studio. And initially, over the past sort of year, this is what we have seen customers doing. However, there is a change underway. And this is the key reason why. Because within the studio environment, you can actually reap the advantages of having 2110. All of the production advantages of being able to split out the essences, deliver audio without video, do retiming easily again against a common PTP timestamp. These are all key advantages of the 2110 standard. But when you're doing long distance backhaul, those advantages are just not tangible. And the focus comes really on having something else, something which is simple, something which is reliable, something which is easy to work with and familiar. And 2110 in that instance is not really it. And that's why we're seeing customers asking for something else. This slide just highlights some of the complexities that I'm talking about when we're looking at 2110 over these long distance links. So first of all, You're not dealing with one composite flow per service anymore. You're dealing with multiple essences. You've got your video, multiple audio, ancillary data as a -40. This complicates redundancy handling. It complicates monitoring. And it complicates redundancy handling because you've got to be wary of what essences go with a service, whether the timing is correct, what are you actually allowed to switch to, are the clock planes going to be the same? What happens if your -40 essence, which might actually have relatively low value, fails? Do you want to do a switchover? All of these are considerations and options that you don't have if you have a composite signal encompassing your video, audio, metadata, and timing all in one format. So, as you can see, long distance backhaul, that is a disadvantage. Another is when you actually need to reconcile the timing planes between your essences, you need to put them into a buffer. But you're actually trying to reconcile very different things. You've got video essences which have a very high bandwidth and therefore a very fast packet interval. And you have audio and ancillary data which have much less bit rate and a much lower packet interval. So doing that reconciliation complicates that process, that buffer, and it can actually add quite a significant amount of delay simply because you're dealing with disparate essences. Your -7 complexity is increased because you're not performing one -7 on a composite signal per service. You're performing multiple -7s on every essence. And the same with FEC. Once again, because you have such a disparity in bit rate between your different essences, it actually complicates FEC, makes actually -5 FEC not the best solution to apply for anything other than the video essence, and is yet again another complexity. So as you can see, 2110 introduces problems, and these problems become particularly acute over long-haul distribution networks. So what is the solution? And what other trends are we seeing? So to build up, to present what we believe is the way forward and what we are seeing customers asking for, the industry trends are actually making this worse, because from contribution events, we're actually seeing a requirement for more services at higher and higher bit rates, okay? So you really, in a major production scenario, have literally hundreds of essences which you have to manage, and that is difficult. The alternative is VSF-TR07. And this is to, rather than encapsulate for your long distance backhaul using 2110, you go from the 21 domain back into the MPEG-TS domain. And the advantage of doing that is that you're back now into a composite format. So you have one IP flow per service. Everything becomes simple. The timing is embedded. You don't have to worry about PTP across your network. So it really simplifies everything. And because you don't need the advantages that 2110 offers you in terms of being able to split out the individual components of your service, then it really is a win-win. If you can make it work properly. And this is the big if. And I have to say, it's taken a long time to make this really work as the industry expects it to. Because you have some problems here. If we're talking about packetizing as an MPEG-TS, a JPEG XS encoded feed, then you want to retain the characteristics of the codec, which is ultra-low delay. The XS codec is going to really deliver line-level latency for you. If you do not have a properly adapted MPEG-TS encapsulator, then you can easily consume 100 milliseconds or more in that encapsulation stage. And then why bother You know, it really doesn't make this an attractive solution. The only answer would be to stay with 2110 unless you can get MPEG encapsulation to deliver low latency for you. So there is a lot of adaptation to do. And what we have seen is that you need to recompile the FEC stage completely to accommodate the very high bit rates, which you would not normally see with AVC and HEVC. It's a very different use case. With AVC and HEVC, you're looking at, you know, perhaps 20, 30 megabits for a UHD feed. With JPEG XS, you're looking at a gig plus if you're doing a 10-to-1 encapsulation. So there's a big change and you need to adapt that accordingly. Dejittering also. The dejitter stage is very important, of course, and that needs to be adapted for these gigabit throughput feeds from where it would have been designed originally for MPEG AVC, HEVC. But perhaps most important of all, and where we have found the biggest bottlenecks in terms of delay, is on the decoder side, when you come to reconcile the composite timing carried in the PCR to the PTSs carried within your elementary streams. That needs to be rewritten completely to deliver the low delay that we need for this use case. But it can be done. And what we're now seeing, having done all this work, is the ability to offer MPEG-TS encapsulation with exactly the same delay throughput that you would get if you maintained SMPTE 2110 across that network. So, of course, what we're talking about is having the customer who may well be using 2110 at their event, hand off 2110 to us, and then we actually do the JPEG XS compression and place it over the network in the MPEG-TS domain, okay, as a composite signal with everything contained within one flow. Video, audio, timing as PCR, everything. So we're bridging those two worlds now, effectively. So what are the consequences and things that you have to be aware of when you bridge those two worlds, the 2110 and the MPEG-TS domain? Well, I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them is audio handling, because within the 2110 domain, you will present audios either as a -30 or a 31. When that is encapsulated according to VSF-TR07 into an MPEG-TS, then we use a standard called S302M to do a bulk transport of the audio, just basically encapsulate it into a PID and send it. S302M has a limitation. It can only carry up to 4 stereo pairs per PID. And 2110, a lot of customers now are looking to use fat essences, which carry much more audio than that. So what has to happen is that when you receive a -30 or 31 essence containing, let's say, 8 stereo, 16 stereo services, then you have to divide it into multiple PIDs to carry them as S302M with this maximum capacity of 4 stereo. And then you have to have a multiplexer within the decoder to rebuild your fat essence again. Okay? So it's just another stage. It's I think, really valuable to be aware that this step needs to happen. Okay? Another thing, clocking implications. So when the ST2110 is handed off, the encoder will normally clock to the incoming RTP rate, which is, or should be, stamped to the PTP clock. So if you're doing excess compression to VSF-TR07 and generating a TS, that means we need to generate PCR. Okay? So effectively, we will clock to the RTP rate and generate the PCR to that clock rate. At the other end of the chain, you need to go from the MPEG-TS domain back into 2110. And to do that, you will need to have a frame sync capability, and you'll need to clock the decoder to your local PTP reference so that the 2110 output will be PTP locked. Okay? If the time domain is the same between your encoder and your decoder, there shouldn't be a delay penalty, okay? Because there's no need to apply any rate adjustment and have frame sync incorporating extra delay. But if they're not, so if you're running a different PTP domain at your send source to your decoder environment, then you can accrue extra latency. And it's important to be aware of that. In fact, it can be a frame or even more if you're carrying Dolby E. So it does matter. Clock domains matter if you want to maintain ultra-low delay throughout the whole ecosystem. Another thing to be aware of is NMOS control. So this is a really hot topic within the industry at the moment. Everybody that, or most of our customers are implementing systems which are heavily reliant on NMOS at the moment, 2110 plus NMOS. And of course, 2110 is what I would call a really layered spec, because you need to have the 2110, you need to have PTP, you need to have NMOS to make it truly routable and usable. At the moment, there is a little bit of work to do within the specification domain to provide a common way of identifying what has been encapsulated into a VSF-TR07 domain. Because what we're finding is that customers not only want to route traffic within the 2110 domain, they also want to route traffic when it has been compressed and encapsulated according to TR07. And there is a small amount of standardization work needed to complete that, okay, which I think the industry now is committed to do. But that means that you can have end-to-end NMOS control throughout this whole process, okay? Just expanding on NMOS and the implications are architectural considerations, because the whole portfolio that is being presented to customers now is so flexible. 2110 is highly flexible with so many options. That's really what customers like about it. But at the end of the day, it makes interoperability more of a challenge when you have so many options layered on top of each other. And just to highlight what I mean, I think it's quite common for the major industry vendors who are providing complete 2110 ecosystems to take architectural decisions and decide how they're going to implement it and offer them to their customers. And a key consideration is, for example, how does the PTP arrive? Is it in-band or out-of-band? How does NMOS signaling get provisioned? Is it in-band or out-of-band? And these are big decisions, especially for smaller vendors like us, who need to be interoperable with anybody's ecosystem. Because what it means, effectively, is that we have to support a myriad of options. So we have to literally support both. And of course, by in-band and out-of-band, just to explain, let's say that you have a device like this, which is a high-density encoding solution. Okay, so there are multiple encoders within that device. Each of those encoders will be individually addressable as nodes, okay, for ISO 4 discovery. But how does that traffic, how is that traffic managed? Does it go through the centralized management plane, i.e. out of band, or is it carried within the ST2110 domain itself. And does it really matter? Well, you might think it doesn't, because at the end of the day, this is all networking. You can solve these problems through networking. But our experience is that it really does matter, because customers don't want to spend more on networking. They often don't want to depart from the ecosystem that their major vendor may have enforced and told them that they should use. So it really does become a big problem. So manufacturers like us, therefore, have to take a highly flexible approach and just support all of the options, which makes things actually quite complex. Okay, so I think, as I've mentioned, the flexibility does provide an example of how it can be translated into more complexity. And what the industry is looking for are simple solutions. And definitely the VSF-TR07 encapsulation mechanism, now that it can deliver the goods in terms of low latency, really does provide a great format for long-distance backhaul and telco backhaul. It's well understood, easy to monitor, and is really easy to switch, control, everything. Oops. So in terms of conclusions, the multiple layers, when you need to consider making a practical solution, there are really so many things that you need to consider now at multiple layers. But at least there are good options for interfacing the very different worlds of, the local studio ecosystem, which may well thrive on 2110, and the advantages that it delivers really are very tangible and important. But those advantages disappear and become a nightmare when you put it into the context of doing long-distance backhaul. But if you use the standards that are now available, and manufacturers have optimized so that there are no tangible delay penalties in, for example, going the VSF-TR07 route, then you can get highly workable systems that really deliver at all levels. Okay. And just to finish up with, if you'd like to see these solutions, please come and see us. We're in Hall 1.
All right. Thank you, David. Do we have any questions for Dave?
You said earlier to get the latency optimized, you had to rewrite the PCR, PTS and DTS.
Yeah.
What do you actually change on those three timing values to optimize them?
It's really the process. And what I would say is, if you come and see us on in Hall 1, but what I will say, Joe, is if you look at our history of bringing TR07 into the market, the first implementation had about 150 milliseconds of additional delay. So you could use JPEG XS, encapsulate it to TR07 with 150 milliseconds end to end, and it was great as a demo, as a concept. But customers, why use JPEG XS if you're going to lose the advantages in the capsulation? It's not a push to get away from 2110 on the distribution network. The second implementation reduced that to 80 milliseconds, and now we can comfortably do end to end, with reasonable network, typical network of around 20 milliseconds end to end, which is as good as 2110.
All right, David, thank you very much.
Okay.